Good evening and welcome to episode 3 of Reading Between the Lineups, the show that gets to the person behind the Discord persona. I'm your host, DRC. How are we all doing tonight? How's everybody doing? You guys ready for a fun show tonight? Thanks, Chuck. Chuck with the 4-leaf clover. Looks like a 3-leaf clover in the chat. So my guest tonight is QuantaCondor, leader of the free-to-play group BFF, Perfect League champion, active voice on both the Discord and the message board. And we had an opportunity to talk across a wide range of subjects. We talked about the origin of free-to-play teams, free-to-play organized teams in Perfect League, in Out of the Park, dating way back to the very beginning. We've got some good tips for the free-to-play and budget player, and we've got some just general chat on many of the newsworthy happenings in this game cycle in which QuantaCondor found himself right in the center. And thanks for the subscription there, CFed. And we've got a lot more. But before we jump into that, let's quickly take a peek at the program schedule. So most of you know this already, but for anyone who doesn't, we go live 3 times a week. We go live on Thursdays for This Week in Perfect Team, where we break down all the content that Chris drops on us. And I am super excited for the show that's going to be 2 days from now. Tons of anticipation for the playoff series number 3 and the toppers. Depending on how good the SEs are in that set and how good the toppers are, that's going to have a profound impact on the market, on the meta. There I said meta. People are always waiting, so go ahead and drink if that was your drink word. And so I am just super borderline anxious to see the cards on Thursday, and I think a lot of people are too. On Sundays, we broadcast the Perfect League World Series. If you missed last Sunday, the Sheeple King beat Maxfire in 6, and it was a great World Series. It was back and forth. It was very exciting, and wouldn't you know it, the World Series ended on a walk-off error by defensive replacement right fielder Willie Mays. So you see a bunch of weird things happen there, but more than anything, it's not just your normal play-by-play. What I try to do on Sundays is bring a deeper level of analysis, really dig into the matchups that we're seeing unfold, look at those high leverage spots and see who's really favored in that given moment, and really infuse it with a lot of stats. So try to join us one time if you haven't yet. And then Tuesdays, we've got this show, Reading Between the Lineups. And my guest for next week will be announced at the end of this stream. But before we get to QuantaCondor, let's get to Hit and Run, which is a segment that I like to do to cover relevant items within the Out of the Park universe. What's going on the Discord? What's going on with the game? What's going on just in general here. And tonight I want to talk about the Out of the Park 21 card database. It's here. It dropped. The long-awaited Out of the Park 21 card database. Now, Chris has said multiple times over and over, this is a 1.0 version. They got something out, they got it live, and from here, there conceivably will be development and improvements and other ideas infused. But what we do have is the first web-based card lookup tool, which is cool. We haven't had one before. Really, the only way you could get this information was by going to Kidney's document and looking it up yourself. And that was a service that Kidney has done for quite some time out of the goodness of his heart. So it's good to have an Out of the Park Baseball sponsored and backed version of this that you can tap into on your phone, on your computer, in a web-based form. So my take on where this is and where I think it would be best in terms of where it could go, where it could evolve, is what I want to talk about tonight. And I think the best way to do that is really to compare it to what we have today. So let's take a look at the card database as compared to my buddy, my guy, Mr. Kidneys. And Chuck's right in the chat there. It's an excellent opportunity for everyone to thank Kidneys for providing that service that he has the majority of this game cycle, infusing that service with very meaningful rankings to help contextualize the cards that are in there. So kudos to you, Kidneys. So let's take a look at a couple features here. So all players and ratings in the Out of the Park card universe, both of these have it. The Out of the Park one is a web-based one. Kidneys one is in a Google Doc that you can download, pull down to your desktop. Fully filterable. So this is where Kidneys has a little bit of an advantage here. Given that it is Excel-based, you can filter it in all the ways that you can filter Excel, whereas the Out of the Park one currently has some limited filter functionality, and it doesn't work necessarily just like Excel. So as you want to do more granular and maybe more layered analysis or deep dives, it currently doesn't support that today. Certainly a good growth area, though. And then mathematically backed player rankings for WOBA and FIP. This is a Kidney special here. I think he piggybacked off of some of the minds and Out of the Park players of years past and has really made it his own and updates that on a very frequent basis. And that's really the basis upon which he has card rankings, player rankings. And to be clear, this is not an area that I would request Out of the Park to even move into. Now, the regressions for this change very frequently. I think it's honestly best done by the community. And I think because of that, Kidneys will always have a place in terms of keeping that document up to date and keeping up with the changing player landscape in terms of how cards perform and how those regressions need to be updated. But let's look at some growth areas that I think would be really interesting. So L7 values. Being able to put onto this database what the L7 cost is for a given card. And shoot, we could even go beyond that. We could do all-time high, all-time low. We could go in a number of different ways. Now, the beauty is that Out of the Park has all this data. It's on their side of the fence, and there's really no way for Kidneys or anyone else to get at it. So there's no feasible way for someone from the community to keep up with this. But it would be extremely valuable, interesting, and just loaded with insight if Out of the Park could figure out how to get this level of data connected into this document. Next, circulation numbers. Again, another thing not possible for the community. But knowing how many of each card is in circulation would be super, super cool, one, and super interesting. And would really contextualize various things that we find. What are the conversion rates on special edition cards? When a brand new card like the Tom Glavine that dropped a couple weeks ago comes out, how many are in circulation this morning? Oh, there was 6. Then you check at night. Oh, now there's 8. I need to keep an eye on that buy and sell channel to see if one of them is being advertised. A couple more got pulled. And I think this would be extremely interesting, extremely valuable, and really make the card database a go-to tool that people are frequenting, perhaps even multiple times a day. And I know with 94 bench, there's been different instances where those circulation numbers would be critical context, especially knowing when new ones have either been redeemed from a special edition perspective or pulled out of packs. And then lastly, just expandable discovery on click. So I think people would love to be able to click on any one of the names within this and then have a screen pop up very similar to what pops up on your Out of the Park baseball client when you click on a player. You see the card art, you see the ratings. It can be in a familiar format to you. So the format that you're used to seeing it on your player side. I think that probably requires some web development skills, some drill down skills or drill down capability. But on their side of the fence with all that information and with all of those screens, I would think that it was possible. So that is the end of Hit and Run and my thoughts on the card database. So with that, let me go load up the interview. My guest tonight for reading between the lineups is none other than QuantaCondor. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great.
Awesome. So glad to have you. I think most everyone on the Discord knows you and has interacted with you in some form or fashion, and you've been at the center of a lot of a lot of this game cycle in a number of different ways. So I'm very excited to dig into some of that tonight. But before we do, why don't you tell us a little bit about the real person behind QuantaCondor, QUC?
Sure. Yeah. So hi everyone. My name is Ryan. I am a physics grad student at UC Santa Barbara. I'm studying experimental particle physics. So I do a lot of stuff at the LHC at CERN. I'm originally from Minnesota, so I grew up there, born and raised. Played a lot of hockey, as cliche as that is. I played hockey all my life. In fact, I play on the ACHA, which is like the club team here at UCSB. Um, I'm a huge fan of board games, so whenever you host a board game night, there's always this one person you know who to talk to. So in all the different communities that I'm a part of, I'm the board game guy. So for all you fans, probably I'd say Terra Mystica and Betrayal and Avalon are probably my three that are go-tos, but I got a big old collection. So yeah, big fan of that. I think that mostly covers it.
Yeah, so I don't fancy myself a huge board game avid fan or anything, but my local friend group had a game before the pandemic where we'd get together weekly and play some games. And I'll just run a couple of the game titles by you, see if you've heard them. But Viticulture is the one that I actually appreciated the most. Is that one you've bumped into yet?
I don't think so. I don't think there's just so many board games that are out there. I still need to increase my coverage. I mean, I probably own probably 30 of them, but there's so many. There's probably 500 good board games. So, long life of board game playing ahead, I think.
Yeah, speaking of board games, Out of the Park Baseball really is just an overcomplicated and digitized board game. How long have you been playing Out of the Park, and really what brought you in to begin with?
Yeah, so I interact with a lot of people on Discord, and they have played Out of the Park for a long time. I'm a relative newcomer, so I actually started in Out of the Park 19. I distinctly remember looking for new gameplay, new sim to try out, and the sort of claim to fame for Out of the Park is that on Metacritic, if you look at the top PC games of all time list, and you're looking for some game to play, if you want to check a certain box that unfilters, I don't know, some games that Metacritic didn't think were deserving of being on the list, I think Out of the Park 2007 or something like that is like fifth, or it's like top 10. And I mean all games, which is insane. So if you look at the user score, people are upset about it. But so I saw that and was like, okay, well, it's probably a pretty good sim game. So I got into Out of Park 19. So this is before the Perfect Team had launched. So I got it near launch and played it to death. And I think it really helped sort of drive. I was already something of a baseball fan, but I think it helped drive my interest in baseball, to see all the depth and all the history and everything. Yes, and so I've been playing since, and since Perfect Team launched, I've been basically a sole Perfect Team user. But that's really my Out of the Park history. I started in quite recently in 19.
So it sounds like it wasn't necessarily baseball that brought you into Out of the Park, but rather looking for a new game. And the fact that you were a baseball fan certainly didn't hurt that. But you found it based on like video game research. Is that fair to say, or am I
Yeah. I mean, I've
misinterpreting?
always been a fan of sim games. I mean, sim games are great. The whole playing Madden or playing it goes way back to MVP Baseball 2005 and ESPN NFL 2K5. All those stuff, and playing all those sports games to death. So I've played sports games a lot and played the franchise stuff for a long time. But and Out of the Park obviously has this reputation for being such a good sports game, a sim. So it was sort of a natural union. But it is right. I didn't come to it specifically because it was a baseball game. I came to it because it was a great simulation game.
Yeah, and I'm not too different myself. Like the first baseball sim I got into was actually Baseball Mogul, which I thought was really cool. And then I got Out of the Park Baseball, and then the depth just blew me away as far as how like literally every element of being a baseball GM was somehow addressed within Out of the Park, which wasn't necessarily the case with the competing franchise. And being a spread head myself, or being a data guy myself, like it was just a marriage made in heaven. So
Yeah, it's yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you want to see it, and I'm still wishing that we finally get that great football sim. And I tried to get into the soccer sims. I just could never do it. But Out of the Park has somehow hit that perfect balance, I think.
Yeah, and why don't you talk to us a little bit about how you interact with the game? So, are you a big spreadsheet guy, or more of a model guy, or both?
Yeah, so I'm definitely a model guy. I think what really got me hooked on Perfect Team was, so I've been playing since the beta. So I got it in 19, of course. So I was sort of plugged into Out of the Park at the time, and I played that PT19, and that got towards Park 20 because it got PT19, the got released towards the end of the cycle. And then I remember Davey released his spreadsheet from the had all the data and some basic models from PT19, and I saw that and said, "Oh wow, this is great. Like I probably could, um, I probably could approach the game this way." And there were some things I saw that I thought I could do a little bit better in my own way. And so since it's been yeah, from all of PT20 and a PT21, it's all been about finding a good model and getting a bunch of data and trying to fit everybody and trying to get all the right years and everything and all the overalls to make a good tournament teams. And it's very much been a way to try to model all the different aspects of the game. Yeah, that's definitely how I approach it.
And clearly, you're doing something right. So, I don't know, 4 or 5 weeks back, you won the Perfect League, and there's actually a really detailed forum post where QuantaCondor goes through every step leading up to that Game 7 win of the Perfect League World Series, and I'll link it to the chat when we're live, so you guys can check it out at your leisure. But people really, and you are, to be clear, you are a free to play team.
Yeah, 100%, 100% have been since PT19.
And that really leads me to my next question. So people look at your roster, and you just about have all the top players. Less some of the more rare tournament cards that you have to win in tournaments, and they doubt that someone could have achieved all of that without either their using their credit card liberally, or significant improper help from alt accounts or others within the game. And what would you say to them?
Yeah, so I kind of empathize with them because when you look at a team, even when I look at a team, I use the term whale, and when you look at all these teams that have top players, you think whale. I mean, because the one explanation that we know everybody has access to is paying. At any point, that some team could just pay a bunch of money and get all the PP they need and go out and buy some fleet of players and be successful. And it's hard to really even say what fraction of the truly top teams have done that. Obviously, I think a pretty sizable fraction of them have. So because it's something that's obvious and something that exists, I think it's easy to just lump everybody together. But every PT team really has a different story. And if you haven't really dived into what can go into a budget or a free to play team story, then it's hard to really know. It's hard to really put two and two together. So um, I think just sitting down and saying, what's reasonable? What's an amount of currency that somebody who doesn't put a lot in could get? How could they get it? Maybe one team's story is that they got the Bartolo early in the cycle and they sold it for 4 million PP or something, or sold noodles or something like that. That could be one team story. Maybe another team story is that they just had some crazy pack luck streak. And you can try to justify that. So I encourage anybody who wants to see my story, which I would say is pretty light on the pack luck. I think famously other sort of people who have interacted with me kind of know this. Yeah, you can see everything that I've done, and you can read my story. And I think that what I've done is pretty consistent with a lot of other people. So not just people who are free to play or budget, but I think there are a lot of teams where their current asset total is much larger than what they put into the game, because of all the things with the team of the decade economy being so predictable, and to some extent the Faces franchise economy being really predictable. So I would say if you're really in disbelief, that's a moment that's really insightful for to learn as a player. For me, reading Elemental Knight's write up in PT20 about how he took a free to play team from nothing to having every top card in the game, and that was a case where it was really hard to. You didn't have Team of the Decade that was really easy to hit and speculate on. That really opened my eyes up to realize what was possible for free to play players to achieve.
And was auction house speculation really the key? I'm sure that tournaments play a piece. I'm sure that other aspects play a piece in building a game economy. But is the core part of your story auction house speculation and collection speculation?
Yeah. So it's kind of, yeah. So definitely the way that I took a smaller amount of assets and really elevate it to a large amount was auction house speculation. So early in the cycle, I had a lot of experience in the BFF, the collective, learning how to really work collections and chain them together, and making sure you do all collections that are net neutral, so that you have locked cards in case some new set comes out and you get lucky and it clips it. So I had worked up a stack. In fact, I right when sort of the Team of the Decade started to roll out, I had just finished Jackie. So I had this enormous million PP stack of all this built up wealth. So that definitely has its own piece. And again, you can read my forum write up if you're interested to see how that happened. But there's no way that I don't go from that amount of holdings. And ultimately, if you just are trying to do collections after they're released, there's kind of a ceiling as to what you're able to do. But the speculation definitely took me, it elevated me from that million PP assets to 5 million or whatever it is that I generated up. I think at the end of the last Team of the Decade cycle, I had 2.5 million PP was where I maxed out my holdings. So I'll have to say that a lot of my insights came from JM, who was really the market master. I think I'm a bit more experienced doing collections on the front foot than he is, but I definitely just imitated a lot of his insights that he helped give. But yeah, speculation was huge. Speculation is huge all the way through to get any team that's cheap to be successful at this level.
And speaking to free-to-play teams or budget teams, they're basically in a near daily dilemma of deciding what to do with inbound PP, especially early in the cycle. You just got your team, you've got your 6 packs that you start with, and in entry pool, you're racking up some PP. Do you immediately invest that into additional league players? Do you start building a bronze tournament roster? Do you start investing that into some sort of flip strategy in the auction house or some sort of collection speculation? It's a really difficult and nuanced decision. How did you go about building your strategy to help make those decisions on a daily basis?
Yeah, so I think the most important thing that and this applies to free-to-play and budget players especially, but this is true in general, is you should have a goal. You should have a target. If your goal is, make diamond or be an above 500 team in diamond, your strategy is going to be different than if your goal is win a perfect league title. And the amount of time it will take you to achieve those goals will be different. The types of players you buy and when you buy them will be different. So, a lot of the decision making you make is all colored based on that. So that's one piece of it. The second piece is I would say that the most important asset that you can have as a free-to-play player, especially, but again, it can really apply to anybody, is liquid, available in your bank PP. So you can do so much with that. You can turn that into flipping cards. You can have it available to do speculation. It's just absolutely massive. And there's also things like if you want to consider investing in a tourney team, you should think, okay, so what's my goal? Am I trying to win a perfect league title? Am I trying to win, make diamond? How long do I think that will take? Then you can start to say, all right, so I have 3 months of tourney income before I kind of get there. What can I afford to pay for? What will pay itself back to me? It's a little easier at the beginning of the cycle because pretty much everything will, because you got the whole year ahead of you. But in general, it's all this type of thing. You have to sit down and be able to evaluate your options and assess what's the best. I think that's the most important skill that anybody needs to learn, is being able to separate all the options and being able to evaluate them. Because once you can do that, then you just pick the best one, and it's pretty straightforward. But learning to do that's a little tough.
Yeah, and I think it's tough, especially for players playing this game for the first time. they're walking into Out of the Park, and it's just this cool baseball team building sim. So they're like, oh, cool, there's tournaments in here too, or oh, cool, there's an auction house. So like most people are walking in, and they will be the furthest thing from having a developed plan and even an understanding of where they could reasonably get to. So now that same player is probably 3 months into it, and maybe they're sitting in their straddle team that will dominate gold and then get relegated from diamond, or they're somewhere along the spectrum of teams that you see out there. Now, what would you tell a free-to-play or budget player that feels as if they're just stuck in that situation and can't really figure out how to get above it?
Yeah, so I think this has been true for basically everybody who plays Perfect Team, with only maybe a tiny number of exceptions, including myself. There's been a lot of times where I hit, the first time, and the first push I made right when the game launched, I hit diamond and everyone was good, and I wasn't, having 100 wins, right? I was, I didn't make the playoffs the first time I hit diamond, and it took a while to really, be competitive there. And then the first time, and I think also the second time I was in perfect, I think I played through half the week, said, I'm not a playoff team, and had to go back down and realized there was this big gap between me and the next level. So the best thing to do when you're at that point is to just figure out, who the budget guys you have, figure out who is really good value for you in terms of your bats and your arms and everything, and figure out who is expensive and you're able to deal, and then just rebuild. So, I don't mean like quick sell everyone in your whole team, but maybe someone's a collection piece. Maybe someone's a 50K pitcher, but really you're kind of more in the 10K range, or maybe someone's a 200K player, but most of the other rest of your roster is like 50K or less, and just part everything out. Get as much liquid, raw PP as you can, and then reevaluate. Say, what collection do I have access to now? Now that I have sold off everything out, now I have 300K or whatever the number is for you. What do I have access to now that I didn't before? And then that gives you an ability to reevaluate the landscape. This is why it's important to be able to evaluate your options, because there are some things that emerge. Like, for example, early in the game, the Jackie set. So it costed like 300K, 400K to build, depending on when you did it. And Jackie sold for 500 to 700K, depending on how close you were to getting him off. He was even closer to $1 million earlier, closer to his launch. If you have the 500K, if you've parted out and you have all those assets, you can do Jackie, and then you have like 300 or 400K additional funds, and you can pivot and go the other direction and really overcome that hump. But it's important. It's important to just have your goals and be able to reframe, and don't be afraid to rebuild. Don't be afraid to lose a season or two to the rebuilding effort, because you always come ahead stronger, and it's pretty fun, honestly, to rebuild.
Was it hard sitting there and having your model telling you that the optimal lineup is one thing, but you knowing that you have to go the other direction because of your financial resources?
I mean, it's a little, but not quite. I mean, it's kind of fun, the challenge. It's like everybody likes rooting for the Athletics. Everyone likes when you play the Out of the Park in the base game. It's kind of fun to go to the teams, the low budget, and see what the sort of challenge you can get to overcome. So for me, in the early game, before I kind of hit the jackpot on speculation, a lot of the fun came from finding that gold player or that diamond player, Pesky or Evers or something like that, who could really perform at a high level, and being able to assemble a big team of that. So, in fact, I think one of my favorite things to witness in BFF was watching. For the longest time, Chazzy Cat had this roster with like 10 golds on it or something. I mean, and Diamond is way harder now, and it was less hard 2 months ago, but it was no like cakewalk ever. But he stayed up in Diamond and had winning seasons for a long time with really cheap players that were fighting way above their pay grade, and so that's fun for me. Obviously, it's cool to be able to get the top guys and be able to assemble a roster to compete for perfect. But for so much of the game, I didn't even think that was possible for people in my in BFF. The one thing you have to realize is that we didn't really know what the ceiling was in BFF when he started. I mean, last year there was no single league. I mean, we just had our own sort of league that we got to hole off into, and everybody could really make perfect. You put enough time in. It wasn't that tough. So it wasn't really about the distance between the top players and whatever else I had. It was about, just trying to do what I could with what I had, and competing with the other guys that were there.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you've mentioned being as liquid as possible as some good advice for a team, a free-to-play or budget team. What other advice, or what is the best advice that you could give them aside from that?
I would say, I talked about learning how to value things. So the best way to do that is learn what a player should cost. So you see something like, in a collection, right? So let's say you see some collection reward that's gets released on stream. Like when Gwyn launched, or some other card, Maze, or whatever. Pick your card. It's super valuable to be able to say, I think he's going to cost 500K or 300K or whatever. Part of that comes from having a model, and if you're able to sort of project how good you think a guy is, then probably a lot of the community might agree, if it's a decent model, because a lot of us are pretty close, I think. But so if you're able to identify the top guys, then it comes one step down. Okay, so what's a typical diamond go for? What's a typical, like, I'm not talking about a bottleneck, just your average face of the franchise diamond in October, what did it cost? Or in November, what's it cost? And then once you have those pieces, you can start to build a picture, and you can start to find these places that you can exploit. Like maybe AL Central is profitable, maybe NL Central is profitable because Hornsby costs this, and all this other guy costs this. You can add up all the pieces. So I would say, and the way you build that is by looking at what guys cost already. So look at existing collection, bottlenecks. You don't need to look at exactly the card you're looking for, but find something similar. If you're looking for, a certain, I don't know, Padres bottleneck, maybe you look at the Royals ones to give you a sense. Maybe look at the Golds to give a different picture. Just try to get a handle on what the economy looks like. And you don't have to go super hard in on speculating. You don't have to, worry about flipping all day. It's not about that. I mean, if you have a good enough handle on this, you can start to do those things. But you only have so many assets available to you if you're going to be free to play or budget, or even if you just are deciding you're not going to put any more PP in, buy any more PP. So learning what things cost and what they should cost, and learning what's a good deal versus what's not. That opens the door for you to just find enough good deals in a row, and then before you know it, you found 20 good deals and you're up 100K, and it's all sort of proceeds from there.
So you've talked, or you've at least alluded to the group that you're part of, BFF.
Yeah.
So why don't you share with the listeners what BFF is and really how BFF came to be? Sure.
Yeah, I'd love to. So really, I think the best way to get a picture of it is to just talk about what free-to-play has looked like in Perfect Team since the beginning. So I don't know how many people know this, but when Perfect Team 19 launched, when it initially came out, the first 2 weeks or week and a half or something like that, it was all free-to-play. You couldn't buy PP. So it was this crazy environment where the whole entire universe was free-to-play. So that was fun, and so you could say, in some sense, that the free-to-play sort of community started at the beginning. So then, when the game launched, the ability to buy PP, there was a demand for getting a free-to-play option, free-to-play group to put together. And I think the first major one that could put together was Our League. So in PT19, the scene wasn't enormous, but I think Our League ran, and I don't think I was a member of Our League in 19. Just so you know, for people not aware, Our League is a free-to-play group. It's run on the forums. There's these 20,000 long, post thread. That's the Our League thread, and their rule is that you can't have live players, which no, player of the month, no team of the year, no MLB live players. For the people at the top, it kind of seems like a quaint rule, but the idea was we just want to play with historical players that are in the database instead of any of the live stuff. We don't worry about ratings changes. Really, people coalesced around that, the existence of any free-to-play group, and the free-to-play is the other rule. So they just all came together and started playing together. And then PT20 launched, and Our League was better than ever, and people were coming in because the new game launched, and there are lots of teams in Our League. Our League, by the way, stretches across all. It's just this friends list. There's all number of. I think they had 60 or 80 people to launch a PT20.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it was huge across all the levels. I mean, so you'll have your collective that hits the top, and then you'll have 50 teams in between the bottom 4 levels, or it's really catered to everybody, and it's still running again. So if you want to, check that out, it's a little more casual free-to-play group, which has its merits. So that ran for a while, but the top players started to kind of separate themselves a bit. So I remember Abe, who goes by Alan Seox on the forum. I probably butchered that. He made a post that said, "Hey guys, so I was first OL member to make Perfect. Does anybody want to hook up?" And so that really drew some people in, and the so-called OL and near free-to-play NFTP group formed. And that actually was a long, it probably ran for 3 months of like near full overflow friends list of just this. The only rule is you either had to be OL, so pure free to play, or you had to be like less than $100 or $50 or something. I forget what the exact line what we said, but budget teams. So we ran that for a while, and a lot of some of the most active and talented managers were in OL, the OL and near free to play Perfect League and PT20. So that ran for a while, and it kind of ran its course, and after a couple months, people started to get a little bored. And then it was at the same time that kind of slots got formed. It was the same idea. People are getting a little tired of, the main experience, and they kind of want to start a new team and see what the new experience is like. And so Davey, so again, this guy who made this famous sheet that I think was the basis of the stuff that's Kidney used in terms of the layout and his PT19 sheets, what I use. So he has moved on since, but he's a big name in that time in PT20. So he, organized a group of whales together and said, okay, well, let's make a free play group. Why not? We've been sort of duking out at the top. Let's see what we can do. And let's also come up with a rule set that is like kind of skill based. So, what can we do to try to take luck out of the game somewhat? So he got a bunch of whales together, and he made a forum post say, "Hey, we're making a new free-to-play group," and that drew a lot of the top free-to-play, most active managers in the forum at the time. So that was my hook into Discord. Was from Davey's invitation to BFF, and so then there was this merger between these like active, like top free-to-play players who kind of knew all that how to get around, and these whales who knew what the top meta in the game looked like and had good game knowledge. So the idea was to come up with a rule set that was balanced. So the one that was settled on was that you couldn't sell any gold plus cards that you packed. You couldn't sell. So if you opened a perfect, couldn't sell it except for live cards. You could sell live cards because in PT20 live cards were quick sell value for the entire history. So we're just like whatever, it's too much of a headache to monitor. You can sell those if you want. But what this meant is that anything you pulled, you really had to use. You couldn't, have a picture of what team you wanted and then go get that. I mean, some people maybe did eventually anyway, but if you pulled a diamond, it was a big deal. And in PT20, there wasn't this big saturation of perfects, even diamonds. I mean, there were a lot of cards like Lenny Dykstra, say, at 91, who had been around for a long time, was a live set reward basically in PT20, and a lot of other golds that were viable for forever. So pulling a gold or a diamond had a lot of talent, and that really made impact on people's teams. So that was the idea. Make this group, this core group that had this sort of equalizing rule set. And then of course you couldn't influence the economy in any way to help your teams. You couldn't transfer points to other teams. The idea was that we're having one team each, and we're all going to see how good we are as managers. So that happened, and that was a ton of fun. And we had a lot of interactions. In our perfect group, I still ATD and me and Glass Guy Bob and Anachronism and Wills and Nil Will and a couple other guys were pretty active in JDA and some other guys. OMG Puppies. We had membership. Anyway, so that was fun. But we got to the point where it was like down the stretch, and it was annoying to pull a goal. You couldn't sell it. You just had to quick sell it. And there's a couple other things. We realized that we didn't do this in PT20, but if you wanted to, you could just sort of dominate everybody by doing some sort of AH strat. Yeah, there was nothing limiting you from flipping cards or speculating or whatever. So PT20 ran its course, and so PT21 came along, and we decided to modify our rule set a little bit. So we decided that in addition to the existing rules, we would open up the ability to sell golds at the All-Star break, which we did. And we also instituted a rule that you can't flip. So you can, if you buy a card, you have to, a Gold Plus card, you have to wait a week for reselling it. So that really, by the way, led to a lot of emphasis and speculation in BFF. So by design, really all of our market activity was limited to either flipping silvers, which you could do because it was below the rarity line, or speculating long term. So that had ramifications down the line, and we didn't really know what the economy would look like. And it turns out that gold didn't really matter that much, and live cards were crazy at the beginning, and silver flipping is profitable for So it's hard to really predict what happened. Yeah, but that's the idea, to give you a whole picture. The idea of a BFF is this free-to-play group that's not just free-to-play, but also has these restrictions. So it's really a test of the managers in that group against each other, with no real expectation, that you necessarily are the greatest, team, are capable of reaching the same highs that other teams can. I think we realized months in that it was possible to do that still, which was crazy, and I don't think anybody of us expected that. But that was never really the intent. The intent was to find this group of people who are like-minded and a peer group that you can enjoy the game with and play together.
So you mentioned that one of the core tenets was to, not falsely use the auction house to create markets unto themselves. Now I know PT20, one of the hallmarks of it was that they struggled with way too many bottleneck cards. Was leveraging bottleneck cards part of the BFF strategy back then, or was that against the rule set?
Well, so yeah, so to clarify the rules is that people had these whale accounts, right? And then there's some free-to-play players. So the rule is just that you can't take your whale account and manipulate the market somehow to benefit your BFF team. Frankly, I think a lot of the TP teams just didn't, the BFF team became the main. So, but there wasn't any sort of restriction on market activity. You could do whatever you wanted in PT20. So I think a lot of the way that I made my balance in PT20 was there was this so-called L7 bug. So for the longest time, big bottlenecks, when a card suddenly was bottlenecked, its last seven didn't change. It stayed for, so imagine Padres Diamonds last seven being like 15K. Like that's insane. Like they're just going to get bought up immediately.
Right.
So it really, and so there are a bunch of these, Duke Snyder 96 and Freehand and a couple of these other guys that were just massive bottlenecks. And if you could sit on the AH and find them, then you could, finish the collection and sell the reward and do all the things. But really, if you bought it, you could really just resell it, later if you really wanted to. Like I said, flipping wasn't a big tactic in PT20 BFF, but definitely using collections was, which is kind of the similar thing, right? You're buying a cheap thing. You could always resell it, but instead you do the collection and then you can sell the reward, use the reward, whatever you want to do. But bottlenecks and being active on the AH and being able to watch those, that was a big part. And I think any person who did collections back then, especially if they were on a budget, can kind of speak to this. It was all this race to try to make sure you can find the snipes for the big stuff.
Sure. So how many members do you currently have in BFF?
Yeah, so we have, so at the beginning of the year, we had like 50, I think. And now we're at, I think we have something like 30. But I would say that there's only like 10 or 15-ish like active teams spread mostly across Diamond and Gold, and some in Silver also. So, at this stage of the game, there's been some attrition. And some people have also left because they found that they were close enough to get to Perfect, but they found the BFF rule set a little too restrictive, which is fair, totally fair, especially as you can imagine, the inability to sell the historical diamonds that you pull from the million diamond packs that you get in the Fidget franchise wave was super killer, and a lot of people saw that and said, "Nope, I'm out." But they're still active. They made some alts, and ultimately, BFF is more about the community than it is about necessarily making sure that you're active in the diamond group. So all of us kind of have the same DNA. So like I said, so like 15-ish active people, I would say. Something like that.
And when someone decides to break the ranks because they want to sell a big tourney card they won, or they just feel like they can't get through where they want to with the rule set being what it is, any hard feelings when that happens?
No, not at all. None at all. We all have the same DNA. We all have these philosophies about trying to value the cards and trying to find the different angles in the economy and which tournaments are the most efficient and all this. We've all been through that and have all these conversations. So we're all friends no matter what. In fact, I think a lot of us are super pumped. So King Julian, he won a Lefty Grove, and well, he initially won a really bad handpicked perfect, but then it was rectified. And he got this SE lefty. I think he sold it for $2 million or something like that, and he eventually won a title, a perfect league title, and we were all super pumped when that happened. So no bad blood at all.
Yeah, so why don't you talk a little bit more? So we had Walnut on a couple weeks ago talking about the camaraderie had within the DLL, and I've seen that firsthand, and that's absolutely amplified the game experience. Why don't you pull the curtain back a little bit and talk about the BFF community, camaraderie, what's it like inside that Discord channel, and just pull the curtain back a little bit for the viewers tonight.
Sure. Yeah, it's definitely. I think a lot of us would have quit the game a long time ago if we didn't have everybody to bounce ideas off of and find new angles and figure out what the meta looked like. So I know between JDA and JM have been really competitive, and MD Angel, and interacting with people who are tourney aces like Chazzy and Catch, and a lot of these other guys. Really anytime if you want to know what the bronze cap format looks like, you can just bounce in and say, hey, so what's the optimal strategy, and you'll have the expert who has 400 wins in that format be able to give you the scoop. And so it's been really great to as a resource for thinking about strategy. What park factor build. What does righties look like? What does pro con look like? What does pro home runs look like? Is that even viable? That type of thing. It's just the paradise of anybody being able to bounce whatever strategies you have, and we're all so invested in finding see what we can come up with to really find the next great thing. So and we've come up with things like a complete game forcing, which was fun, and I was sad to see it go. We also have a big record book. So we've been maintaining a record book since the very first time that we had the first batch of BFF teams in Diamond, and so we have all the detailed records of WAR and average, whatever you could come up with. So it's been fun watching to see if a guy breaks a record, if a guy's on pace to get close to the home run record. It's cool to watch how close they're going to get, if they're going to do it. And we're still also in awe of OMG Puppies putting up 300 stolen bases in the very early stages of PT21. So that's our one untouched record. I think he had something like 300 stolen bases. Nobody's even come close. I don't even know if we've gotten halfway.
So what is that, like a King Kelly, Cool Papa Bell driven team, or do you even remember?
Yeah. Well, King Kelly, you're reaching a little too high up there into the pocketbooks. I think it was, Monty Ward and Buck Ewing, and he might have had, I can't remember. I think this is even before. This is close to when Jackie launched. So it's Cool Papa was out of the question. It was a lot of those types. The guys who were in the upper 90s, and he just slid all the sliders to the max, and I think he won his division too that week somehow. So it wasn't like he was going for broke. It somehow worked. So yeah, that type of thing. It's fun to see. Sometimes people go all max factors to see if they could break the runs record that week, or min factors to break the various pitching records. So that's been a fun dynamic that helps keep the game going.
Yeah, and you mentioned complete game forcing in tournaments, which did go away. But as the competitive free-to-play group with aspirations for the top, you guys are uniquely and actively looking for every possible angle and edge to really close down the gap that exists between big spenders and yourself. So do you believe that this has, at times, driven members to take some liberties with the spirit of the game, whether it's through using dozens of alt accounts or taking dives for another member of BFF within a tournament? Do you believe that has happened?
No, I don't think so. I mean, it's not that's something of a misconception. It's not really about BFF versus the big spenders. I mean, like I said, at the beginning of the year, we didn't even know that we had the ability to compete with the big spenders. And in BFF 20, it wasn't about that. I mean, we just had our own little group, our own perfect league, and there's a million perfect leagues. You don't really have to interact with everybody else. It's about, it's about competing with each other. So there have been, like if somebody's competing in perfect, we'll root for them, of course. But nobody's helping each other out here. I mean, many times, if you're wondering why it took so long for JM to get to perfect, because the other BFFers keep beating him in the playoffs over and over. And he had a 13 diamond playoff loss streak. Nobody was tanking for him, and as well for me. I mean, I had a lot of seasons where I get beat in the wild card by high 80s other BFF teams who are know how to find the angles and deal with me and try to get past it themselves. I mean, so everybody's trying to really show everyone else what they can do. It's not really about like coming together to beat all the other whales. It's about coming together to think about cool strategies we can all employ, and then seeing how we can employ them ourselves. So yeah, definitely the amount of competition that happens within BFF is, I think, understated. There are also some things that are not obvious to people that are outside of BFF. So the case I know where the Seattle Freeze catch took the dive, quote unquote. So that case, so you have to understand that our rule set. So we fold in diamond and perfect tourney SEs that you win into the like packed group. So if you get a diamond or a perfect tourney SE, you can't sell it. But you can sell the golds. And I think anyone who's been watching the recent gold SE market knows that there's been a big demand for some of these. I know in the case of that one, that there was speculation that you could sell the North for like 50K or 60K, since some of the other recent tourney SEs are going for crazy prices. At the same time, I think JM just wanted to, he has so many assets anyway, he leads all of us in assets. He just wanted, to get more cards so that for the different turn of year subsets, like the Andrew Jones, there's some year grouping he can play in. So it wasn't like, like Catch was diving for JM so he could go further. It was, hey, like that was more descriptive of the kind of case that I think we all know about, that there are some times that the tourney rewards where like the third, fourth, the second reward is just less valuable to than the upper rewards. In our case, it was less valuable for a specific reason that was not obvious to, I think, outsiders. But I mean, I think everybody kind of knows that this is happening. And I will say, he did get a strike from the devs for that. And so I think he's not going to tank in tourneys, and I don't think the rest of us are going to do that either. So it's kind of a lesson learned, but it wasn't to benefit, JM or anybody else.
So it wasn't a BFF taking a dive for a BFF, but it was actually trying to position themselves for an SC that they preferred, even though that SC was a gold versus perfect or a diamond or the Andrew Jones.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It was more valuable because you can't, Andrew Jones is, not better, I think, than whatever Jay-Z's running in center field. And so it was just, less PP. It was 20K versus 50K, so he's going for the 50K instead. It's kind of makes sense if you think about it. And so that happens sometimes. There's other things that happen, like, for example, I think there was another case a couple of months ago where Abe, who since left BFF, I think he tanked for the last like 10, 15 games or something. Like he had Bagwell play second base or something versus lefties because he was a couple games above the relegation line. He just needed a couple losses to weave on the other side. And so I think he was playing like 9 of 15 games against BFF or something. And one of the teams, people saw it was like fighting for a playoff race. And so they said, oh, what are you doing? You're trying to tank so the guy can get on a playoff race. What we didn't see is that the other teams that Abe was playing in that stretch were the people competing with JM for the divisional race. And as a result of Abe losing games down the stretch, JM actually lost the divisional race by like a game or two. So there's all different, if you try to look and find cases where you think there's bad activity going on, that then you can dig around, but there's nothing here. We're all competing to try to one up each other, and we're not trying to game the system or anything like that. I will say though, I don't really know what's going on with the alt accounts. There's like this guy who's made like 6 teams, and they're all called like the QUC all caps blank, and they're in like gold and silver. I don't like, how would you react if somebody had your username in their team name and they had like 6 of them in randomly, and you have no idea where they come from, It's kind of odd. So, I also know JM had a bunch of alt. There's somebody who made, JM 1 through 12 or something like that. And I know he doesn't. I know he doesn't alt. I know I don't alt. So completely honest, I have zero clue what's going on there.
So those accounts are not JM's.
No, yeah. In fact, I checked a couple days ago because I know you'd inquired about this, and I think they're gone. I don't think there's anything JM anything in there. So I don't know if the devs went through and banned them at some point. I do know that these QC teams are still there. Again, I don't know. I have no clue what's going on there. But I only have one alt, a Big Tomato fan club. There's this guy last year in a big tournament in PT20 named Big Tomato, and he had one of those kind of clunker rosters you see and you say, all right, well, this is a free win. and I think he swept me in 4 games. And then he like went to the semis of the thing. It's like a 128-man tournament, like a high cap or something like that. So ever since I've been in the Big Tomato fan club, and I know JM has one alt, the Newton Dragon sound that we made, and so those arose because this is actually kind of interesting that I didn't mention. So you talk about having to maximize all the angles that you find. So one of the things that we concern ourselves with in BFF and as free-to-play players is on the way up from entry to silver or gold or whatever. How are you going to get your achievement PP? How are you going to maximize that? So a lot of us made an account right at launch to try to get in and see what all the economy looked like, see what the live sets looked like, and so on. And then a lot of the BFFs wanted to make a team on Monday, get game launch on Friday, to get the full week of entry pool PP. Little did they know they had to play in I think there were like 20 people decided to do this. And so they ended up stunting their PP growth because they had to play against all the other BFFers instead of some other normal league. And I had a similar thing. I made a team on launch. I actually realized that the live sets were so profitable, it was better to just do them right away than to get 100,000 more entry pool PP, which totally ended up being true. So I ended up making a second team. But I think, honestly, a lot of the alts just stem from that. People made their initial team to scout, and then they just sort of left it for dead. But, yeah, nobody's alting, this big, wide, like I said, I have zero clue what the heck QC guy who makes 6 teams and they're in gold and silver. I have no clue what's going on there. And I will say, so the reason I know that is because I know what all the strategies are that the BFFers are employing. So it's not just about the end result. The goal isn't get a team that's worth 5 million PP and then, you've done it. Congrats, you won. You need to the goal is to find a strategy that works and be able to say, this is what I did. It worked. And so people, that's what we're looking for. We're all looking for these strategies that are effective. There's a great example of this. So when BFF started, there's a certain player, I don't know if I'll name him, but I think some people have maybe heard this story, that was in BFF, and we all started, and we were off, and he actually didn't get placed with us in the first week in our first Iron League. I don't know if that was on purpose or just because friends list sucks. Sometimes that just happens. And so then we joined up in bronze the next week, and people got to look at his team and were like, oh my God, like, geez, your team is insane. Like, how did you get this? And he didn't actually have a good answer for that. He didn't have a good answer for how he got this. So we said, okay, are you using tournaments? Are you using collections? And you can look at these collection numbers. It wasn't that high. Achievement PP, how are you getting this type of team? And really grilling them in terms of, what's your strategy? Because we're curious. We want to know, if it's possible to get this type of team, how do you do it? And he didn't have a good answer. And we just kept grilling and grilling. Finally, I eventually just laid out all the ways you could possibly make PP at that time in PT20 and said, I think this is the maximum amount somebody could possibly make. I don't think you could make more than this. And your team costs more than this. Can you correct me on where my assumptions are wrong here? And I think he just left after that. So, it's and this whole spirit has pretty much existed since BFF 20 happens. All of BFF 21 has been like this. It's about the strategy. So I don't need to worry that JM, some people think JM's alting or I'm alting. I don't need to worry that JM's alting. I know exactly what he's done. He's shown us screenshots. He's like, guys, I have 20 copies of X guy who we know is going to be in the next Team of the Decade wave. And then he sells them all for 15K. And I know where the PP comes from because shoot, I'm following him and I'm doing it. And if he says he makes 1.5 million and I made 1.1 and I got started a little bit later. I mean, all the processes are pretty well vetted. And especially at the beginning of the free play experience, you don't just get PP out of nowhere. I mean, you have to have a reason for where it's coming from. And, let's say somebody had just big stock of PP that they got, illegitimately or whatever. If it showed up on their roster or in any meaningful way, if their speculative, cost was high enough, we'd start to ask questions like, how'd you get 1 million? Where'd that come from? Everything's all very much vetted because we're so curious we're so competing with each other to try to one up and get the next, big achievement for BFF and win the Diamond title over the other guy that you're competing with in your division. That we're always grilling each other on where we got what we got. So I'm totally not concerned with any of that. We're doing all this all legitimately, and that's part of the fun.
So the self-policing really is a vehicle of sharing notes and wanting to understand people's game strategies they're employing, not necessarily having a regular cadence of interrogations as to how people are building their team, just a genuine curiosity. And then when that curiosity doesn't have a logical answer, then something smells funny in that case.
Right. And formally, at times we've done transaction log checks, so it's easy to scroll through. You can take a quick video of all your transaction logs. It takes a while, but you can do it. And that's asking for this is how we caught this original one player. And we've done it elsewhere. I think we've done it early during PT21 where a transaction log check was done, and people can look through and see what your transactions are. So it's kind of instructive to do that. And I think any BFFer would be happy to do any sort of transaction log check. But it's not super necessary. I mean, you don't need to force a guy to sit there for 10 minutes recording his transaction logs when you know exactly how he, you know exactly the strategy is. Okay, I made 50 grand, flipping silvers. Here's my log of it. He didn't say make, 50 grand. You see in this screenshot of the Excel spreadsheet, you made 51,852, after tax or something, an awfully specific number. And there'll also be from time to time, the screenshots of, guy you bought for cheap, or they'd be the screenshots of the 30, golds that you have for Team of the Decade, or, or diamonds, whatever you have for Face of the Franchise coverage. I mean, so there's not formal, checks to see, what's going on, but we're so in touch with each other's strategies that it's not really necessary. And really, it's not just in BFF where we're doing these types of things. We're working the economy. I mean, there are lots of guys outside of BFF who have had great success with working the economy and tournaments and everything. So it's not like we're doing something that's totally unprecedented that has happened nowhere else. I mean, I like to think that we're on the leading edge, but it's not like this is something that, we only us have access to.
So one of the better known members of BFF was Out of the Park developer Matt. And he was at the center of arguably our largest controversy this game cycle. And at the core of it, the screenshot evidence strongly suggested that the BFF Discord was the location of and the receiving end of some insider information about upcoming content. Now, what can you share with us about what advanced information BFF was receiving and really what you guys were doing with that?
Sure, yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. Yeah, so to be clear, this is what happened. So Matt, as a developer, and I think all of the people in BFF kind of knew this, Matt, as a developer, clearly had access to some sort of advanced timetable or schedule. Like he'd know a couple days in advance at least, what Face of the Franchise teams would be coming out or whatever. Or maybe he'd get a couple days in advance, they'd route around whatever developer Discord. I don't know how they communicate with the developers, it's their game. Maybe he'd get in advance of some the names of the missions, which can be kind of instructive. Like the Dead Ball Bronzes, for example. That was one where after Dead Ball Bronzes launched, he said, "Oh shoot, I thought I got all the Dead Ball Bronzes," sort of alluding to the fact that he knew that this mission was coming out. What he didn't do is share any of that information with us. There was completely no cases where Matt was telling us, like, "Hey, this is the next Face of the Franchise team," or "Hey, this is the mission that's coming out," or whatever. In fact, if you check what some of our guesses would be for what the Face of the Franchise team waves would come out and be, they were like pretty bad. Like I know there's one, I think the first wave or something, I said, I think it's going to come out, it's going to be KC and these other 4 teams. And we all know it was KC because there had been a card spoiled and it was like 100% everybody knew it was George Brett. And so Matt said, yeah, well, I can confirm that not all of those are wrong. And then it turns out that 4 out of the 5 of those were wrong. So, it's to the extent that we got any sort of advanced information, it was like that type of stuff, really nothing that gives us any real insight. And it also wouldn't really have been in the spirit of the group either. I mean, we're all working so hard to find the lines, find the little tidbits, there's all the discussion that happens in, I'm sure, other private Discords about, when Chris teases some hint or what you think constrains the next Face of the Franchise release teams, if they're going to be newer or whatever, all that discussion's happening. It doesn't really serve the spirit of the group to spoil that, and it totally never happened. In fact, there's a lot of times, and you can see this if you read my forum write-up, where I made big major calls on what the content would look like that were just wrong. Like I thought totally convinced there was going to be a Team of the Decade overall topper. I was completely ready. I burned a whole ton of PP, wasted doing like the Trout, and Barry and A-Rod decades that were just garbage and all this. I'm like, there's no way they released a Barry that's this bad and there's not a topper. It's just 0 chance. No topper. And stuff like that. Nobody had any call in terms of what was going to happen, just like everybody else. The only other times that I think there are some other quotes that have been taken out of context where Matt's talking about something like how this I think there's a quote from PT20 where he mentions how Kershaw is going to be useful in the future or something like that. And I think some people took that as being evidence. The other thing you have to realize is that there's this strategy where, so in this case, and then I'll make it the general point. So in this specific case, it's a good idea when you do collections to lock high name recognition players because they tend to be in the future collections more often than not. So in the case of PT20, there are all these team sets where it was pretty much like iconic decades and stuff like that from the teams. So we all knew Koufax was going to be the Dodgers one eventually, stuff like that. And so some people took Matt mentioning, oh, Koufax will be useful as him trying to drop a hint that Koufax would be in the Dodgers mission. But everybody knew that, So there's stuff like this. Like if you really comb through the log and try to like find things that you think are information of Matt dropping to BFF, you can try to take something out of context, but it never happened. I mean, it would have been out of the spirit. Matt's playing the game just like everybody else in terms of building his team and everything. And we're having all these conversations about, all the predictions we're trying to do that we got wrong a lot of the time. It doesn't really hold up if you really dig down to any parts of it. Plus, if you don't believe me, the developers themselves actually came into the BFF Discord and did their own investigation, and Chris and Rich both said that there was nothing happened. But I will say Matt definitively 100% did pre-buy some of the. So he'd know that the Giants were going to come out that Thursday. I don't know how far in advance he learned that type of information, but he definitely knew about that, or maybe he'd know about the specific players in the next team of the decade wave, which I might argue pretty much anybody who looked at Baseball Reference knew the list of players that are the next team of the decade wave. I mean, you made a set based on the top WAR lists of the guys from decades. It's kind of not that hard to deduce.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's just stuff like that. Yeah. So in fact, I think at one point Matt says you guys bought up all the this blank team of the decade guide that I'm trying to look for. And he said that after the set launched, because we knew exactly who was going to be in the set for Team of the Decade because everybody did. You said go look, and we knew that, I should say, because JM saw that Chris answered a question about why A-Rod or something was the guy from the 2000s, and then he answered it using a screenshot of Baseball Reference. So JM says, hey, I bet Chris is just looking at the top 10 or whatever Baseball Reference guys and using that. And so then we just did the same thing, and it was pretty straightforward. But it's that type of stuff. We've all had our own hooks to what content was released. We all had our own sense of predictions that were right and wrong, just like everybody else is. In fact, probably wrong in more cases in the case of Freeze the Franchise and all this. So whether or not Matt it was right for Matt to pre-buy, I don't think it's a big deal. I think he's a developer. I don't really think he's on the same plane. I know other people feel differently, that's fine. But he definitely did not share any of that information with any of us. Totally never happened, and completely untrue to suggest that it did.
So next we've got a question submitted by one of our viewers here, and it's really just a broad question about tournaments. So what are some of the common mistakes you see made by tournament players today?
Yeah, I would say so I'm a cap guy. So a lot of my judgments are going to be colored by cap because I think cap's fun. You kind of get this new, you get to balance the highs and lows and everything. So I think if you think about it, what new cards have we got? Well, a lot of perfects. Batters especially. We got a lot of great batters. The bats have gotten way better. What hasn't gotten way better? The iron bullpen. So in this day and age, a lot of high cap games, or even other, so I can say high cap like open cap or diamond cap or something. A lot of those games are really decided by runs against the irons. So if I see a guy rolling out and he has nobody, just nobody, and it's just iron pen, you're gonna waste 6 strong innings from Pedro, and then Orozco is gonna let up 5 runs and you're gonna lose. And so then what did the Pedro innings mean? And maybe that didn't used to be true when the bats were not as overpowering. Maybe you could justify some of this, but I don't think. I think the times have changed there. I also see. I am a big anti double duty guy. I don't think he ever has rested enough to really get you enough innings. And I think there's better ways to spend the points. I know he's a common enough choice. I'm against double duty. And then of course there's all the basic stuff, like, if you're playing like a high rarity format like Diamond or Open, you should really go stars and scrubs. I mean, you should go perfects and irons or something along those lines. You shouldn't run out a big, fleet of golds. And you especially shouldn't spend deep on your pen. I mean, it's good to spend some on your pen. Don't spend none. Don't spend a ton. Spend a little bit, like a couple guys. So if I see people go deep in the pen, I'm like, phew. If I see people go zero on the pen, I'm like, okay, well, that's a free win too. Well, some of the time, it's out of the park, so it'll fluctuate.
So what's a tourney card that you think is very valuable, whether it's for a cap tournament or some other tournament, that you don't see a lot of people using? So what's one of your favorite tourney cards that you can share with the group?
So I'm sort of a cap guy. In particular, my format that I have been queuing for a long time is Diamond Cap, and I am a big fan of and so there are a lot of staple Diamond Cap cards. I think a lot of people kind of know what a lot of the staples are. The low rarities, mid rarities, and everything. I don't need to tell you that Roger Connor or Pop Lloyd is good, but the left field is really thin in Diamond, and I mean, a lot of people take the Alec Thomas route, maybe Erstad or something. Maybe Torriente. He isn't really fully trained in left, so it's kind of deceptive to put him there. But I love the Mets 90 left fielder Cleon Jones. So he's got huge contact. There's a lot of left-handed pitchers in the Diamond Cap meta, and he's got like 100+ contact VL, and he's got a great. The Avoid K is not as useful in Diamond Cap, at least like it is in Open Cap, and especially like in base leagues. But he's still got enough of it. I mean, he's got a ton of range. Yeah, definitely Cleon Jones. I don't think anybody else runs Cleon Jones, but I tend to win a decent number of Diamond Cap events, and I'm taking Cleon to my grave.
Sounds like a card we should all check out, Cleon Jones. So when it comes to making a model for anything, really, the results of that model or the results of the observed statistics that you'd see that you'd compare against that model are really born out of what cards are in play. And so when it comes to building a model for, say, cap tournaments, it can be difficult because it's hard to know how a Jesse Orosco is going to do against a 100 hitter versus how he's going to do against a 54 hitter, for example. So what can you tell us about the model that you leverage to build out tournament rosters and how you're able to crunch a meta that has really wide field of available players?
Yeah, so the way that I construct cap tourney rosters, I guess there's two things to say. One, the meta in your specific tourney format might be different than what you see in other tourney formats or what you see in base leagues. So a lot of the time, before you even start, you have to alter what your assumptions are. So I do that by collecting data on different formats. So, I have data on bronze and Diamond Cap and Open Cap and gold and silver and all these other formats. So that's the starting point. You have to adjust. In my case, I adjust my model weights. But in general, if you think that super high Avoid K is useful in iron, then, maybe you're not going to go so far in iron, that type of thing. So you should have different expectations as to what's good. And then from there, once I have my model weights in for my format, what I do in for cap is I put together my what in my view is like the most efficient, high quality, low rarity card that I can do. So I just fill it with like all the lowest punt base cases that you can go. So you have your Huey Crits and you have your Jeff Mathis and the Iron Clemente and all these guys. And then from there I compare the expected increase in WAR per cap point spend relative to that baseline. So then it helps you identify, for example, I don't think there's a really great low rarity third baseman. You get Brooks Robinson, whatever's fine, but his bat's awful and he's going to give you nothing. So a lot of the time, the third basemen end up becoming a little more valuable than you think they would. I mean, the upgrade to Stan Hack maybe is greater than you would think because there's not as many good options in the middle there. So I would say a lot of my entire cap philosophy is start from the base case, start from replacement level, and then just progressively make the next most efficient replacement you can. So upgrade to Pop Lloyd and shortstop. Okay, well, and then do Roger Connor. Okay, well, Maybe you have to do center field next. Just see who gets you the most WAR over the current slug that you got in there, and then eventually you'll build up something. And doing it that way, you'll make sure that you have the most efficient replacement, even if it's not strictly speaking the highest WAR number. Like the WAR number is not always the same. Like you can get a lot of WAR in the corners. If you're a high defending shortstop, maybe you can get a lot of WAR. But you really care about that WAR over, wins over replacement. In your case, the replacement is this the low rarity guy that you have in there otherwise. So that's definitely my philosophy: is start from the bottom and build up.
Excellent. As we look to the future, what's really left on your to-do list for Out of the Park 21?
Well, I did dominate DLL, so I can check that one off.
The
from
playoffs
this
seem to
past week.
disagree.
That's true. That's true. Laid a big egg. Absolutely. I'm gonna take that big L. I'll take the dub from the regular season and the L from the postseason. Both of them together. Yeah. So that was nice. The next PTCS coming up. It's kind of funny. Earlier in the year, there's a point when I think I hit the first or second wall in perfect. I think it was the second time I got to perfect, and I realized I was totally out of my element and I needed more assets. And this is before I think my big Team of the Decade payoffs had come, or maybe it was before Face the Franchise. Anyway, and I said, you know what, screw it. I'm a tourney player now. There's no way I can ever compete at the top. They just got too many assets and everything. And then I ended up winning perfect like a month and a half later. But I would really like to return to that mindset of being the tourney player, focusing everything in, and see what I can do there. I would also. So since I won my title, I've really been focused on finding the so-called micro list build. So this, the factor setup where you can run and try to get, a consistent playoff appearance in perfect, running absolutely zero micro. So that's kind of been my, my pet project. And I've concluded that, lefties is pretty good. There are other things worth exploring. So that's still on the to-do, figuring out how to place those.
So kind of like an autopilot pseudo strategy type thing?
Yeah, exactly. So I'm a big believer that you don't need to be sitting there. You can run a one-man pseudo. You can pseudo your 5/5 as starting pitcher for 3 batters, during the regular season, and never touch it. If you have 7 arms in the pen, you're fine, if there's no starters there. What about 2? Maybe you can run 2 if you have enough arms. Maybe you got to cut down a platoon somewhere, but maybe you can justify that. Maybe you got to just run, righties and have a bunch of righty starting pitchers because they're so good and they're in meta and everybody's running righties. There's different questions to try to address there. I'm convinced that a guy who's pseudoing, just look at JM, who dominates perfect every week, is he's the pseudo king and the micro king. He knows how to handle that. But I'm interested to find something that's a little bit lower maintenance, and because I think the key to winning in the playoffs, and especially in perfect playoffs, is get there. If you can get there 10 times, you'll probably win 1. Or if you get there 5 times, you probably win 1. It's just about volume. Eventually, you'll come through. So
I'm putting that theory to the test currently.
Oh yeah, you definitely are. That's the other thing, is I really would love to see some of the the community members that I've followed finally cash in and get that title. So maybe not on my list, but I'm having fun watching. When JM got his, and it was fun to see Max Fire almost get there, and I'm hoping he gets back. And a couple other guys. API, you're out there. You eventually cheese your way to the top. I know you will. So yeah, and I'd love to see. You've hosted these. You've done a great job on all these casts. So I'd love to see you finally get one and be able to put one under your belt.
Well, I appreciate that. So one thing that you just touched on a bit is that this game has become, with the current meta, extremely micro heavy, and that means you're spending a lot of time. And when you spend a ton of time on something, you can often get burned out. So I'm curious to hear what your plans are, if any, for Out of the Park 22.
Yeah, so it's kind of tough. I think what I have been most looking forward to for a long time is innovation in the tourney business. So, despite the fact that I've done all this stuff to speculate, got all this, PP and tried to compete at the top, I only really did that, I think, because the only really competitive format that we have is perfect. We have PTCS. It's fine, whatever. You play some BO7s and then somebody wins. I don't feel that that's really reflective of the skill of some of the top tourney players. The guys who are grinding, who have 1,000 tourney wins, who know all these different formats, how they work. I would love to see a new tourney format, released a new tourney series that rewards knowing a lot of formats, that rewards being able to predict formats. For example, my dream is something like, imagine you get a qualifier point every time you win a daily or a weekly. You get 2 if you get a weekly or something like that. And then the top 16 people automatically qualify, who are top 16 in the qualifier points for that season. And then maybe the next 16, or everybody else gets to enter a last chance tournament who's had at least 10 points or some line. This is some of the common format that's in a lot of games. And then say the winner of, you get 16 teams from your last chance tournament, and then you can have a 32-man where you can do, say, a BO7 in a format that's never been done before. So maybe you do some dead ball format, but you have to use 2000s era guys, or some crazy thing where you're really testing the ability for managers to manage and come up with something that can perform. So I would love to see that. If they don't release that type of thing, where you can really flex your tourney muscle, then who knows what PT22 will hold for me. I think I've done a lot of what I want to do in Out of the Park as a game. But I do know that they have done a lot since PT20. I mean, compared to PT20, PT21 is light years ahead. So, you never know. And I think Chris has a lot of good ideas he's been fed. So we'll wait and find out.
Excellent. Well, that concludes our interview with QuantaCondor. Any closing thoughts?
I'll just say that we all play this game a lot, and it's been fun. I mean, the entire community, not just BFF, but the whole broader community, is really what makes this game a blast. So I thank everybody for all the competition and all the back and forth. It's been it's been a joy.
And maybe next time you make the playoffs in DLL, you'll win a game.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, just you wait. One of these times it'll happen.
So that, ladies and gentlemen, was QuantaCondor. We went to all fields on that one. And thank you, QuantaCondor, for being willing to discuss everything that I had requested ahead of time. Thank you for being candid and open with the audience here. I think there were still some lingering questions and lingering interests. And I think that was certainly insightful what you were able to provide tonight. So I thank you for that. If you guys are new to the stream, if this was the first time you've ever jumped on, go ahead and click the follow button. Click the notify so you know when we go live in the future. I share the program schedule at the beginning, but we go live 3 times a week. And normally, I like to believe that we have some pretty good content on this channel. You definitely don't want to miss Thursday. Thursday is going to be a huge content drop with wild ramifications. And we're not just talking about, how good are the cards. That's always something that we have our eye on. But really, what's going to happen to the auction house if the toppers are incredible? What's going to happen if they're not? What's going to happen if the SEs are the best batch of SEs that we've gotten? So there's a ton on the line on Thursday. And I'm excited to pair with Kidneys to talk through it all right after Chris goes. And we will be going on an hour early, I believe, and I can be corrected if I'm wrong on this, but I believe Rich is also not streaming this week as well. So once Chris is done, we'll be live and we'll be ready to go on Thursday. So definitely don't miss it. But thanks again, everyone, for joining. And with that, DRC out.